I haven't forgot to record yet. Okay, now we'll talk about procedures on HF, which are a little bit different. And I guess the reason they put this section in here is because as a technician, you can operate voice on the 10-meter band, which is part of HF. So essentially, it's kind of the same, except we use the CQ call, which represents calling any station. And I think that's one of the codes when it was mostly Morse code. So it's a lot easier to key in CQ than it is calling any station. So the protocol is that you do CQ 3 or 4 times, and then your call sign, and then wait to see if you have a contact. I think actually you do a DE in your call sign when you're doing Morse code, but we're not that far in my class yet. If you're replying to a contact, okay, then it's like on a repeater. You give the calling station's call sign followed by yours. If you're doing any, and this is true really regardless, you're always supposed to give your call sign when you transmit. At every 10 minutes or at the end. So even if you're keying the mic to see if it works, you're supposed to give your call sign. Now, not everybody does that, particularly on handy talkies. A lot of times you'll key the mic just to see whether or not you can key the repeater and get it to send its call sign.
I can open a repeater sitting in my living room. I think it's a Melbourne repeater or something. I don't know where it's at.
I've been hitting the KSC repeater on 0.25 watts.
Yeah. This is.
But then I got an outside antenna.
That one in Melbourne, I can key it up and open it up here. I forgot what frequency it is. I don't know. I don't write this stuff down. I don't remember.
What is the meaning of the procedural signal CQ?
Delta.
All right. What should you do before calling CQ? And this would actually be true on a repeater. Okay.
Alpha.
Let's see. Well, that's true. But
Delta.
should you make
Delta?
Yeah, because all of those are true. Probably more about asking if the frequency is in use on HF than you would on a repeater. Usually on a repeater, you want to listen a little bit, see if somebody else is using it. And also that's why you're supposed to say this is, pause to see if somebody else doubled with you. Especially on a net, because you got several people trying to check in at the same time.
Yeah.
How should you respond to a station calling CQ?
Charlie.
Charlie. Which of the following is required when making on-the-air test transmissions? Yeah, definitely not C. Okay, there's another shorthand set of things that I think also came out of the teletype days and radio teletype. And they're called Q codes or Q signals. There's a couple of these that you'll have to know.
There's some of those are on the. test.
Yes, 3 of them maybe. QRM. The way I like to remember that one is the M means man-made. Okay, so you're receiving interference from another station. There's a QRN, which means you receiving noise. It's not interference, it's noise. You got a high noise level, like where Dan is. Right. QSY means that you want to change frequency. So you're telling the other station that you want to go, up 5 or down 5, something like that.
That was one of the questions there. So I know that one was on there.
QRS, which is unique to CW or Morse code, where you're telling the other station to send slower. You can't copy. A lot of people will try to send very fast to show how fast they can send. But if you can't copy it, it doesn't work. QSL is a common one, and where the QSL cards come from, it's an acknowledgement that you received the message. QTH is your location. So if they ask where your QTH, that's where you're located.
Remember that one because of H, home.
Home, right. And QRL is, is the frequency busy? So instead of saying that in Morse code, you just do QRL. I don't know that I ever heard anybody say QRL on voice. Have you? I have not. So which Q signal indicates you're receiving interference from other stations? Which Q signal indicates you're changing frequency?
Bravo.
Bravo. Bravo.
Oh, not sure how some of the letters don't necessarily make sense.
It can be confusing.
I don't know who came up with the codes.
Government.
Okay, the FCC does basically a broad view. Okay, they specify basically the frequencies, the bands, not what's in them. And that is like things I passed out. Band plans, okay, are done by they're voluntary guidelines that are set up on how those frequency bands are allocated. In other words, usually the lowest part is for CW and some of the digital modes, and the higher end is typically voice. And then they may carve out a few little sub bands that are specific for extra class operators, where they're the only ones. That's one of the privileges. If you get an extra license, you can operate in a couple little spots nobody else can. So that's the whole purpose. And the FCC basically delegates most of their stuff. I mean, they do the broad view rules and regulations. And the more specific stuff is done by volunteer organizations.
The 2 reasons that I decided to go ahead and get the extra were, that's one of them is for the frequency, because I can get closer to, it's kind of come down to where my radio days are spent chasing long distance communications. And it gets me closer to some of the overseas band plans, so I can get to them a little easier. Whereas on the general, there's pretty sizable gap in there. So we find a lot of people operating in ranges that you can't reach with that license. The other reason that I went for the extra is because it's more usable as volunteer examiner. Because as a general, you can only give
Technician.
technician tests. As an extra, you can test everybody.
So what is a band plan beyond the privileges established by the FCC?
Now,
Alpha.
Alpha. Okay, one of the basic tenets of amateur radio, besides advancing the art, is courteous operation. So even when you're dealing with interference from your neighbor or you're interfering with them, you're supposed to work with them and be courteous. When somebody is on the same frequency as you, you're supposed to try to negotiate which one of you is going to use that frequency. In the case where you're both primary users. If you're a secondary user, then I don't think we get to that till next week. It isn't really a negotiation. The primary user has primary use. And we do share some frequencies, like the 60-meter band is shared, which is probably why it's not used that much by amateurs. It's a weird, really weird band. Which of the following applies when two stations transmitting on the same frequency interfere with each other? Did you get that on your test yet?
Alpha.
no, I don't remember that one.
Alpha. Okay, there's also public service and emergency management communications. There's two groups that were set up. One is called ARES, the other called as RACES. Basic difference is RACES is involved with the civil defense organizations. In both cases, they're licensed amateur radio operators volunteering to do emergency service. But in the case of RACES, you also have to be certified or part of a civil defense organization, in addition to having an amateur radio license.
I saw something about it when I asked.
Like a militia or something?
What's that?
What would be a civil defense?
What is
National emergency would be, I mean, if you go to war or if.
No, he meant the civil defense
Like what
organization.
organization?
Okay, this is,
I was just curious.
well, that's a good question. I never contacted them. I've actually one time looked into doing this, but you got to take some training. In other words, it's almost like getting a license to be ARES or RACES. Says ARES was started back in 35. I don't think it's as popular now as it used to be. And there's a lot of clubs like our Indian River Club typically do a emergency management communication exercise like once a month, but not associated with either of those, just as a local club to see what, we could do if power was out, the internet was out, doing simplex communications. Yeah, this is more about all the specifics for one club there that does both. What is the amateur radio emergency service? Called ARES.
Alpha.
Right. What is the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service, or RACES?
Charlie,
Charlie,
Charlie's correct.
Hmm?
Charlie's correct.
but D,
Not the right answer, though.
Stations.
Delta.
Charlie's correct, but it's not, oh.
Is that the
Let's
only
see.
one? So
Well,
Delta.
Yeah, you're using Ultra.
What is RACES?
Delta.
One of the key things is a FCC Part 97, which is what we'll talk about next week. That's the rules and regulations. They're all part of FCC Part 97 of the FCC
Guidelines.
code. If you'd like a copy, I can send you, but it's written by lawyers.
Oh, that's not gonna do me much good.
Well, I mean, you can get all this information out of it, but it's not an easy read.
Yeah. Nothing from a lawyer's easy read.
Uh, Usually to handle these emergency communications, you set up a net. And we talked about it a little bit before. And it'll have a net control station and a net control operator that basically is the manager for the net. So that person is responsible for handling the check-ins and also controlling communications between members on the net. So it's kind of like passing the token around to whose turn it is to talk, type of thing. But that's the function of the net control operator, to do the check-in and organize and manage the communications. Which of the following are typical duties of a net control station?
Charlie.
Charlie. The assumption is that you're operating on the radio, you're properly licensed, otherwise you got a bigger problem. So it's not the net control's responsibility to verify you're a legal operator. The net meeting time and frequency is set up ahead of time, not necessarily. It's by whoever is sponsoring that net, not necessarily the control operator. Which of the following is standard practice when you participate in a net?
Charlie. Come on, guys, I'm the only one answering here. You've been given a delay season, you know.
Okay, we talked about on the net of traffic, which means messages. And if you're passing messages correctly, that's called good traffic handling, where just the passing of messages or giving your traffic is handling traffic. Most nets require that you use the phonetic alphabet, at least to check in. So you give your call sign in the phonetic alphabet.
I hear very few of them do that, though.
Ours do.
Well, I was listening to one last night, no, Thursday night,
Yeah.
and there was a few of them did, but not very many. They just said their letters.
Hmm.
On check-in?
It was 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
Check in.
7:30 or 7 o'clock.
Yeah,
Oh, that's a different one.
I don't know who it was. I was just listening to them. They were,
Yeah,
I think
because on the 730 net that we do, everybody checks in with their
Do they?
phonetic call sign.
because I was listening to one down in Miami that was doing it too. I could hear them. What was that? I think that was on Tuesday night. Something. I was surprised because I was hearing just about every one of them. Every now and then,
Well, now after check-in, they don't use phonetic.
no, they were checking in though.
Hmm.
And well, I'm not on the ham frequencies. This is GMRS.
Well, now see, that's a
That's
whole
totally
different
different.
ballgame. They're not, well, actually, technically, they're supposed to give their GMRS call sign, but I don't know that they have to do it phonetically.
They don't. They just call the letters out. Yeah.
And you don't have to do it but typically
It's recommended.
it's recommended to do it phonetically.
That question's on
Yeah. It's probably the next one.
me.
That's the NATO phonetic alphabet, which we tend to use.
I noticed some of them don't know that too. They try to use it. What was it I heard him say? Joyce or Jeff or something
Oh,
like that for Che?
okay. Now,
Throw some random words out there.
Yeah,
if you listen to any of the digital voice nets, international stuff, like in Europe, they use a whole different set.
yeah.
A lot of names of cities.
Yeah, I noticed they had a different one for them over
They'll have
there.
London and I don't remember all of them, but totally different set. Although it makes sense. I mean, you can understand what it is.
Yeah.
What does the term traffic refer to in net operation? Come on, Rick.
What? Oh,
Operations.
alpha.
Messages.
Best.
Traffic is the message.
Traffic is the message, okay.
Which of the following is a characteristic of good traffic handling?
Alpha.
Delta? Oh, alpha.
That
I think the media.
the message was received exactly as it was sent. Kind of like the old game where you went in a circle and you passed a message around, and by the time it got back to you, it was something totally different.
Telephone.
Yeah.
Good game.
What technique is used to ensure that voice messages containing unusual words are received correctly?
Charlie.
Charlie. In the case of some of these emergency communications, you might send a formal message like a radiogram. And it essentially has 4 parts. It has a preamble, which has information to track the message. It might contain a check or checksum, which is usually just a count of the number of words or what they call word equivalents in the text. The address of who it's intended to, the actual message itself or the content, and then the sender's address, which is called the signature. So it's basically just like sending a letter or telegram. It's the same kind of information. What information is contained in the preamble of a formal traffic message? Delta.
Telling you, man, them flashcards help.
What is meant by check in the radiogram header?
Alpha.
That's so the receiver can see if he counts the same number. If he gets a different number, then obviously something got dropped. Okay. FCC rules always apply, except, what's the exception?
Emergencies.
Right, immediate safety of human life or protection of personal property. Or property. When do FCC rules not apply to the operation of an amateur station?
Delta.
Delta. Delta.
Right, because they didn't list an exception. Are amateur station control operators, which is you, unless you've delegated it, ever permitted to operate outside the frequency privileges of their license class?
Delta.
Delta.
Delta. Right. If it's a real emergency, you're basically allowed to do whatever's necessary. So we talked about on HF, how you make a contact slightly different than you do on UHF and VHF. Use this CQ for calling any station, as opposed to this giving your call sign saying you're listening. You should listen first to see if the frequency is being used, which is just being a good citizen. Make sure that you're not trying to operate on a frequency that you're not permitted. Like you're in one of the extra sub bands and you're a technician. Or you're doing voice on something other than 10 meters and you're a technician. You respond to a CQ by giving the calling or CQing stations call sign followed by yours. Just like if you were trying to contact somebody, you give the call sign of the station you want to call followed by yours. And if you do anything on the air, testing or otherwise, it's required that you give your call sign every 10 minutes and at the end. You know, if you don't do that, that's not something the FCC is going to come and crack down on because they don't have enough people to know about it. You're supposed to do that. The Q signals, the couple to remember is QRM and QSY. So one is man-made interference and one is moving to a different frequency. Band plans or voluntary guidelines on how the FCC frequency bands are divided up as far as what part is for Morse code, what part is for voice, what part is sometimes they have a different section for digital. In HF operation, if you've got two stations trying to use the same frequency, and you're both primary operators, you should try to negotiate who's going to move.
What's the frequency that we're allowed to do on HF?
10 meters, which
28.3 to 28.5.
The public service, both ARES we talked about, and RACES. The basic difference is RACES requires you to be certified by a civil defense organization. And it's specified under FCC Part 97. For nets, there's a net control station that controls the check-ins and communications between the members. We talk about the traffic, which is messages passed. So when you check in on a net if you have something you want to talk about or some information about an upcoming meeting or some such thing, you say you have traffic. Good traffic handling is when the messages are received the way they're sent. And it's suggested to use the phonetic alphabet, especially for check-ins, but for anything where it may be hard to understand, or perhaps it's a noisy signal. Formal traffic messages like radiograms have a preamble, which includes a check, which is the equivalent number of words. FCC rules always apply except in an emergency. So, any questions on that one?